Welcome back to Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. Today's headline cuts through Washington like a sharp blade. The United States government has officially shut down. For some, it's a familiar crisis. For others, explanation, it feels like the unraveling of the world's most powerful government right before their eyes. But beyond the drama, beyond the politics, explanation lies the question that matters most: what happens next, and how will it affect the global balance of power? Explanation. Quick context snapshot: a government shutdown in the United States occurs when Congress fails to agree on a budget or stopgap funding measure. Without it, explanation, non-essential federal agencies grind to a halt, millions of government workers are furloughed or forced to work without pay. Programs, from food assistance to research projects, freeze. It is not the first time America has stumbled into this. Since 1976, the U.S. has endured more than 20 shutdowns, though most have been short. The longest came in 2018, stretching on for 35 days. But this one arrives in a very different environment. The U.S. is facing rising debt, global rivals testing its resolve, and an election season brewing with division. Explanation: the timing could not be more consequential, both at home and abroad. Sure, the immediate event, the shutdown, officially began at midnight after lawmakers failed to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government. The sticking points were as predictable as they were: fierce disagreements over federal spending levels, debates over border security funding, explanation, disputes about aid to Ukraine, and the growing divide over domestic programs like healthcare and climate policy. As the clock struck 12, federal offices went dark. Approximately 2.1 million civilian federal workers now face uncertainty. Air traffic controllers and military personnel are still on the job, but without pay until a deal is reached. Their national parks are closing. Scientific research institutions like NASA and the NIH is halted. Even food inspections and airport screenings will slow, straining daily life for ordinary Americans. Markets immediately reacted with unease. Explanation: the dollar dipped slightly, Treasury yields climbed, and analysts warned that if the shutdown lingers, the world's largest economy could suffer a significant hit. Explanation: for the American people, the Dutchet is a headline. It is a paycheck delayed, a medical approval stalled, or a visa application sitting in a pile untouched. It is a crisis lived quietly day by day until political leaders find a way back to consensus. Historical and political context: to understand the present, we must trace the lineage of shutdown politics. The modern era of shutdowns began in the 1970s. Explanation: after a series of reforms gave Congress more control over the budget process, while what was meant to streamline government instead created new arenas for partisan warfare. The shutdowns of the 1980s often revolved around spending priorities. In the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, where tax cuts and healthcare reform led to high-profile shutdowns. The 2013 shutdown under President Obama centered on Republican efforts to defund the Affordable Care Act. Yet the 2018-2019 shutdown was different. It was no longer just about budget numbers, it was about symbolism. The debate over border wall funding became a litmus test for political loyalty, stretching the impasse to its longest duration in history. Today, the political atmosphere is even more fractured. Partisan polarization is at historic highs. Explanation: both parties are locked into cycles of brinkmanship, using shutdowns as bargaining chips rather than last resorts. Explanation: the very mechanics of compromise appeared to be eroding. What makes this shutdown especially dangerous is not simply but its context. The U.S. explanation is navigating a fragile global order, wars in Europe, and the Middle East, tensions in the Indo-Pacific, and a global economy still bruised from inflation. Allies and rivals alike are watching closely. If America cannot keep its own house in order, what message does that send to the rest of the world? Global reactions: the ripple effects of a U.S. government shutdown extend far beyond Washington. Allies in Europe, who depend on American funding for NATO and for aid to Ukraine, now wonder whether commitments will falter. In Kiev, nation, officials are anxiously tracking Washington's dysfunction, aware that delays in U.S. support could have real consequences on the battlefield. In Asia, in Tokyo, and Manila, see opportunity and risk. On one hand, U.S. defense commitments remain intact, the military keeps running, but the political paralysis raises doubts about America's long-term reliability. On the other hand, explanation: Beijing views the chaos as evidence that American democracy is unstable, an argument it uses to bolster its own system of governance. Financial markets across the globe have already begun to adjust. A prolonged shutdown could rattle investor confidence, undermine U.S. credit ratings, explanation, and disrupt international trade. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency may not be immediately threatened. Of unquestioned stability faces another test. Humanitarian programs abroad also feel the pinch. U.S. funding for international health disaster relief and food aid stalls during shutdowns. For communities dependent on these programs, the shutdown is not a political abstraction. It is a matter of survival. In short, explanation, the world is watching, and the longer the shutdown continues, the louder the whispers of doubt about American leadership will grow. Economic and strategic stakes domestically. The economic cost of a shutdown is undeniable. Each week of closure could shave billions off U.S. GDP. Explanation: furloughed workers mean less spending, stalled government contracts, slow private sector projects, and uncertainty ripples into stock markets. Explanation: credit rating agencies have already warned of potential downgrade rates, which would raise borrowing costs for the U.S. Explanation: government and ripple into higher interest rates for businesses and households. But the stakes go beyond economics. Strategically, a shutdown weakens America's position in global negotiations. Trade talks, defense coordination, and diplomatic initiatives all grind slower. Rivals may see opportunity in distraction, testing U.S. resolve in contested regions like the South China Sea or Eastern Europe. Explanation: there is also the question of perception. A shutdown exposes the fragility of governance in the world's leading democracy. It becomes a narrative tool for adversaries who argue that America is too divided to lead effectively. At the same time, within the United States, explanation, the shutdown raises questions of resilience. How long can federal workers endure without pay? Explanation: how much disruption can the economy sustain before small fractures widen into structural cracks? Explanation: and what does it mean when citizens lose confidence, not just in leaders, but in the system itself? Possible futures. The road ahead branches into three broad scenarios. Scenario 1, de-escalation. In this outcome, cooler heads prevail. After a short shutdown, perhaps a week or two, Congress agrees on a temporary funding measure. Both sides declare symbolic victory and the government reopens. The damage to the economy is limited, though public trust in governance continues to erode. This is the most common outcome in U.S. history. Shutdowns rarely last beyond a few weeks. Scenario 2, limited conflict. Here, the shutdown drags on for a month or more. Federal workers face mounting hardships, economic growth slows, and international confidence wavers. Markets react more sharply, pushing the U.S. closer to recession. Explanation: politically, each side hardens its position, using the shutdown to rally their base for the upcoming election. Global allies adapt, diversifying away from reliance on Washington. The U.S. emerges weaker, its credibility dented. Scenario 3, escalation. The worst-case scenario unfolds. The shutdown stretches into months, combining with debt ceiling battles or financial market turmoil. Essential programs collapse, credit downgrades spiral, and U.S. rivals seize the moment to advance their agendas abroad. Allies openly question America's reliability. Domestically, the crisis deepens polarization, eroding faith in democratic institutions. The world begins to imagine, not just speculate, that the era of unquestioned U.S. leadership could be nearing its end. Each scenario depends not just on economics or policy, but on political will. And in a hyper-partisan Washington, will is in short supply. Tension peak and big question: the shutdown is here. Federal workers are waiting, markets are trembling. Allies are questioning, rivals are watching. Explanation: and ordinary citizens are wondering if their government still remembers who it serves. This is more than a budget fight. It is a stress test for American democracy. Explanation: one that will echo through households in the U.S. and corridors of power around the globe. The big question now is not simply when the shutdown will end. Explanation: the real question is whether America can still govern itself effectively, or whether dysfunction has become the new normal. The United States government has entered yet another shutdown. Its effects will unfold in real time across kitchen tables and trading floors, across battlefields and diplomatic chambers. Explanation: the choices made in Washington in the coming days will not only decide the paychecks of federal workers, but also shape the trajectory of global trust in American leadership. As this story develops, the world watches, some with hope, some with doubt, all with a recognition that when America stumbles, the ground shakes far beyond its borders. Thank you for joining us at Global Current Lens, where we cut through the noise to bring clarity to the headlines that matter most. Stay with us as we continue to follow this crisis, its fallout, with its implications for the world order.